The day you stop trusting money to find love is the day your life truly begins. Ethan Carter had everything most people spent their entire lives chasing. At 32 years old, he was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America, the visionary behind a technology empire worth billions of dollars, the face of magazine covers, the guest of honor at charity galas, and the man every business network wanted to interview. His penthouse overlooked the sparkling skyline of Manhattan. His collection of luxury cars filled an underground garage larger than most homes, and his calendar was packed with meetings that shaped industries. To the outside world, Ethan was living the American dream. Yet every evening, when the city lights reflected across the floor-to-ceiling windows of his silent apartment, the success felt strangely hollow. There were no genuine conversations waiting for him, no laughter echoing through the rooms, and no one who looked at him without first seeing his fortune. That painful realization struck him harder than ever during an elegant fundraising banquet attended by celebrities, politicians, and corporate leaders. Standing only a few feet away, Ethan accidentally overheard his girlfriend, Vanessa Brooks, laughing with two friends while believing he was still speaking with investors across the ballroom. "He's generous," she said with a confident smile. "That's why I stay. Who would walk away from a man who can buy anything?" One of her friends joked that she deserved an even bigger engagement ring, and Vanessa laughed again before replying, "Love is nice, but security is better." Ethan remained perfectly still. His expression never changed, but something deep inside him quietly collapsed. Minutes later, he walked outside onto the balcony overlooking the city, where the cold night air felt more honest than the voices inside. His longtime driver and trusted friend, Samuel Brooks, found him there. Samuel had worked beside Ethan for nearly 20 years and knew the silence in Ethan's eyes better than anyone. "You heard something you wish you hadn't," Samuel said softly. Ethan nodded without looking away from the skyline. "Does anyone ever love the man?" he asked quietly. "Or do they only love the life he can provide?" Samuel waited before answering. "If people recognize the billionaire first, they'll never have the chance to know the man." Ethan turned toward him for the first time that night. "Then maybe the billionaire has to disappear." Samuel studied him carefully, unsure whether those words were spoken out of heartbreak or determination. But Ethan's calm expression revealed something different. For the first time in years, he had made a decision that no board of directors could vote on and no amount of money could influence. By sunrise, Ethan Carter would vanish from the world that knew his name, and somewhere beyond the glass towers and expensive suits, a lonely stranger would begin searching for the one blessing money had never been able to buy. The following morning, the headlines still celebrated Ethan Carter as one of the most influential business leaders in America. But behind the walls of his private estate, a very different transformation was taking place. Expensive tailored suits disappeared into a locked closet. His designer watch, worth more than the average family earned in a year, rested inside a safe. The polished leather shoes were replaced by worn sneakers with faded laces, and his perfectly styled hair was trimmed into an uneven cut beneath an old knit cap. Standing in front of the mirror, Ethan barely recognized the man staring back at him. The confident billionaire who had walked into boardrooms commanding instant respect was gone. In his place stood someone the world would likely ignore without a second glance. Samuel watched quietly from the doorway. "Once you leave this house, people will treat you differently," he warned. Ethan gave a small smile. "That is exactly what I need to see." An hour later, Samuel drove him to a neighborhood nearly 50 miles away, where no one would recognize his face. Before Ethan stepped out of the aging sedan, Samuel handed him a simple backpack containing a bottle of water, a light blanket, and a small amount of cash for emergencies. Ethan shook his head and removed the cash. "If I carry a safety net, I will never know the truth." Samuel wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in Ethan's eyes and simply nodded. As the car disappeared around the corner, Ethan found himself completely alone for the first time in years. He adjusted the old leg brace he had carefully chosen as part of his disguise and picked up a weathered walking cane. Every step became slower and more difficult, forcing him to experience a pace of life he had never known. The sidewalks that once felt welcoming now seemed strangely cold. People rushed past without making eye contact. A businessman accidentally bumped into him and continued walking without offering a single apology. Outside a busy coffee shop, Ethan paused, hoping to rest for a moment near the entrance. Before he could sit down, an employee stepped outside with an uncomfortable smile. "Sir, I am sorry, but customers are waiting for tables. You cannot stay here." Ethan quietly thanked him and moved away without protest. A few blocks later, he watched dozens of strangers laughing together during their lunch breaks, while he sat alone on a park bench, realizing that loneliness felt very different when people assumed you had nothing. Hours passed before he noticed a small neighborhood grocery store preparing to close for the afternoon. An elderly woman struggled to lift several heavy bags into her shopping cart. Without thinking, Ethan slowly walked over and offered to help. She smiled with genuine appreciation and thanked him warmly, speaking to him with more kindness than anyone else had shown all day. As she drove away, Ethan looked down at his worn clothes and whispered to himself, "Maybe kindness really is the only thing people cannot disguise." What he did not know was that someone standing across the street had quietly witnessed the entire moment, and that unexpected stranger was about to change everything. The woman across the street had been loading donated food boxes into the back of an aging community van when she noticed the quiet stranger helping the elderly customer without expecting anything in return. Her name was Grace Mitchell, and after spending years working at a neighborhood outreach center, she had learned that genuine kindness usually revealed itself in the smallest moments. Most people hurried past someone who looked poor, but this man had paused despite his own obvious struggles. As the elderly woman drove away with a grateful smile, Grace walked toward him, carrying 2 paper bags filled with sandwiches and bottled water. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Our center always prepares extra meals. Would you like one?" Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. Throughout the day, he had received uncomfortable stares, polite rejection, and complete indifference, but no one had offered simple kindness without asking questions. "Thank you," he replied softly. "I appreciate that." Grace handed him the bag and sat on the opposite end of the bench without making him feel uncomfortable. She did not ask why he walked with a cane. She did not ask whether he had family. She simply smiled and opened another lunch for herself. For several minutes, they ate in peaceful silence, while afternoon traffic rolled past the small neighborhood park. Finally, Grace laughed quietly. "My coworkers always tell me I make too many sandwiches." Ethan smiled for the first time in days. "Then, I am lucky you do." Their conversation remained simple. She asked his first name, and after a brief hesitation, he answered, "Ethan." She introduced herself and explained that she worked at the outreach center a few blocks away, helping families, seniors, and anyone who needed a little encouragement. There was no trace of pity in her voice, only respect. Before leaving, she slipped a small card into his hand. "If you ever need a warm meal or just a safe place to rest during the day, come by. You do not have to be alone." Ethan watched her walk away, wondering why someone with so little time seemed willing to give so much of it to complete strangers. Curious, he visited the outreach center the following morning. The building was modest, with faded brick walls and a hand-painted welcome sign above the entrance. But inside it was filled with warmth that money could never purchase. Volunteers greeted every visitor by name. Children laughed while coloring pictures at folding tables, and Grace moved from person to person with endless patience, listening carefully to each story. She noticed Ethan standing quietly near the doorway and welcomed him with the same sincere smile she had shown the day before. She invited him to help organize food donations, and although he had once negotiated billion-dollar contracts, Ethan found unexpected satisfaction arranging canned goods beside retired teachers, college students, and local volunteers. Nobody cared about wealth inside those walls. They cared about compassion. As the afternoon came to an end, Grace thanked him for helping and admitted that the center was struggling to keep its doors open because donations had fallen sharply over the past few months. Ethan listened without revealing anything about himself, yet a new feeling settled in his heart. For the first time since leaving his old life behind, he had discovered a place where people measured one another by character instead of status, and he quietly realized that the greatest test of all might not be whether someone could love a billionaire, but whether a billionaire could become worthy of someone like Grace. Over the next several days, Ethan returned to the outreach center every morning before the doors opened. He swept the sidewalks, unloaded food deliveries, stacked donated blankets, and quietly helped wherever another pair of hands was needed. Nobody asked about his past because everyone there carried burdens they rarely spoke about. To them, he was simply Ethan, a quiet man with a gentle smile and a determined spirit. The slower pace of life began to change him in ways he never expected. Instead of checking stock prices before sunrise, he listened to children laughing while they colored pictures. Instead of signing contracts worth millions of dollars, he helped elderly neighbors carry groceries to their cars. Every evening, he walked back to the small shelter where he spent the night, feeling physically tired, but emotionally lighter than he had in years. As the days passed, he began noticing that Grace carried a smile for everyone except herself. Whenever someone thanked her, she answered warmly, but when she believed no one was watching, a quiet sadness settled across her face. One rainy afternoon, after the last family had left the center, Ethan noticed Grace carefully counting a handful of dollar bills before placing them into a small envelope marked rent. She looked at the amount, sighed softly, and slipped the envelope into her worn backpack. A few minutes later, her phone rang. Ethan was organizing supplies nearby and could not hear the entire conversation, but he noticed the concern in her voice. "I know, Dad," she said gently. "I will be there after work. Please do not worry about the medicine. I will figure something out." When the call ended, she took a deep breath, smiled again, and returned to helping the remaining volunteers as though nothing had happened. That evening, curiosity led Ethan to ask one of the older volunteers about her. The woman smiled kindly before answering. "Grace has been taking care of her father ever since he became ill. She works here because she believes every person deserves dignity, even though she could earn more somewhere else. Most of her paycheck goes toward rent, medicine, and keeping the lights on at home. She never complains." Ethan felt his heart grow heavier. For years, he had met people who wanted everything from him. Now, he had finally met someone who quietly gave everything she had to others. The next morning, he arrived early and found Grace struggling to lift several heavy donation boxes by herself. He immediately stepped forward with his cane resting against the wall. Together, they carried the supplies inside while laughing about how every box always seemed heavier than the last. For a brief moment, neither of them thought about money, hardship, or the future. They were simply two ordinary people sharing an ordinary morning. As the center became busy again, a luxury sport utility vehicle pulled into the parking lot. A sharply dressed woman stepped out wearing expensive designer clothing and sunglasses. Ethan instantly recognized Vanessa. She had come to deliver a highly publicized charitable donation on behalf of her family's foundation. Hidden beneath his worn clothes and leaning lightly on his cane, Ethan lowered his head, hoping she would never recognize the man she had once claimed to love, unaware that the next few minutes would reveal far more about every heart standing in that parking lot than anyone could have imagined. Vanessa stepped out of the luxury sport utility vehicle with practiced confidence, followed by a photographer and 2 assistants carrying neatly wrapped donation boxes decorated with the logo of her family's charitable foundation. Before anyone could greet her, cameras began capturing every smile and handshake. Grace welcomed her politely, thanking her for supporting the outreach center, despite knowing that publicity often mattered more to wealthy donors than the people they claimed to help. Ethan remained near the back entrance, quietly organizing canned food while keeping his head lowered beneath his worn cap. Vanessa glanced around the building with obvious discomfort until her eyes landed on him. She frowned slightly before turning to Grace. "Does he stay here?" she asked, in a voice that was soft enough to sound polite, but loud enough for others nearby to hear. Grace smiled calmly. "He volunteers with us almost every day. He has been a wonderful help." Vanessa looked Ethan up and down without recognizing him. "You should be careful," she replied. "People sometimes pretend to need help because they want something." Ethan continued stacking boxes without responding. Grace noticed his silence and answered gently, "Sometimes people simply need someone to believe in them." Vanessa forced another smile for the waiting cameras before posing beside the donation display. Minutes later, the photographer asked several volunteers to stand together for a group picture. Grace invited Ethan to join them, but Vanessa immediately stepped forward. "Perhaps he should stay out of the photo," she suggested. "The foundation prefers a more polished image." The words settled heavily across the room. Several volunteers exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure how to respond. Before Ethan could quietly step away, Grace moved beside him with complete confidence. "Every volunteer belongs in this picture," she said warmly. "Compassion is what represents this center, not appearance." Without another word, she gently invited Ethan to stand beside her in the front row. The photographer captured the moment, while Vanessa's smile tightened with visible disappointment. After the event ended, the media team departed, leaving behind only the donated supplies and a lingering silence. Ethan quietly thanked Grace for treating him with dignity. She looked surprised by his gratitude. "Respect should never depend on what someone owns," she answered. "Any of us could need kindness someday." Later that afternoon, another unexpected challenge arrived. A local businessman visited the center, offering Grace a management position at one of his retail stores. The salary was nearly twice what she earned at the outreach center, along with health insurance and steady hours. The opportunity seemed impossible to refuse. The businessman explained that he needed her answer by the following morning because another candidate was waiting. Ethan overheard enough to understand what accepting the offer would mean. Grace could finally afford better medical care for her father and stop worrying about overdue bills. Yet as the visitors left, she stood alone beside the window, looking at the children playing outside the center with uncertain eyes. Ethan wondered which path she would choose, knowing that her decision might reveal even more about her heart than anything he had witnessed so far. Grace barely slept that night. The management position offered security, steady income, and enough money to make her father's life easier. Yet every time she imagined leaving the outreach center, she pictured the faces of the families who depended on it. Before sunrise, she quietly prepared breakfast for her father, placed his medication beside a glass of water, and promised she would return after work. As she walked toward the center, the folded job offer remained inside her jacket pocket, feeling heavier with every step. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, carrying fresh bread donated by a neighborhood bakery. The moment he saw Grace's tired expression, he knew she had spent the entire night wrestling with a difficult decision. He wanted to tell her that money would never be a problem again if she simply accepted his help. But revealing the truth now would destroy everything he had come to learn. Instead, He asked gently. "Did you find your answer?" Grace smiled, although exhaustion still showed in her eyes. "I think I did." A few hours later, the businessman returned expecting her acceptance. Several volunteers gathered quietly, believing they were about to congratulate her on a brighter future. Grace thanked him sincerely for believing in her abilities, then surprised everyone by politely declining the position. "My father always taught me that success is measured by the lives we live, not only by the money we earn," she explained. "Right now, this is where I believe I am supposed to be." The businessman respected her decision, wished her well, and departed. Ethan remained silent, deeply moved by what he had witnessed. Grace had chosen purpose over comfort when no one was watching, and nothing guaranteed that life would become easier. Later that afternoon, the center received unexpected news. A shipment of food that normally supplied hundreds of meals had been canceled because the sponsoring company had withdrawn its funding. Volunteers immediately began calculating how long the remaining supplies would last. The answer was discouraging. At their current pace, the shelves would be nearly empty within a week. Despite the growing concern, Grace refused to panic. She gathered everyone together, thanked them for their dedication, and reminded them that hope often arrived through unexpected people. Ethan listened carefully, recognizing the quiet strength behind her words. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, Grace noticed Ethan struggling to adjust the worn brace on his leg. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him and carefully secured the loose strap, making sure it fit comfortably. "There," she said with a warm smile. "That should make tomorrow a little easier." Ethan looked at her with genuine gratitude. No expensive gift he had ever received compared to the kindness in that simple gesture. As Grace locked the front door and headed home, Ethan remained standing beneath the fading evening sky. Across town, inside a private office overlooking Manhattan, Samuel answered a secure phone call from the executive board. They informed him that a major charity partnership required Ethan's personal appearance in only a few days. Samuel quietly ended the call, knowing the world was beginning to search for the billionaire who had disappeared, while Ethan had finally found something far more valuable than anyone at the company could possibly understand. The following morning, Ethan received a brief message from Samuel through the secure phone they had agreed to use only for emergencies. The board could postpone his appearance for only one more day. After that, his absence would begin affecting employees, investors, and charitable programs that depended on his leadership. Ethan stared at the message for a long time before placing the phone back into his backpack. His heart was no longer divided between business and freedom. It was divided between responsibility and the life he had unexpectedly found. At the outreach center, the atmosphere remained hopeful despite the shortage of supplies. Grace greeted every family with the same warm smile, even though Ethan knew she had quietly skipped lunch, so there would be enough food for everyone else. During the afternoon, a young boy arrived carrying a broken bicycle. He explained that he used it to deliver newspapers before school, and that without it, his family would lose an important source of income. The volunteers searched for replacement parts, but found nothing that fit. Ethan carefully examined the bicycle, remembering the countless hours he had spent taking apart machines as a teenager, long before he became a billionaire. Using a few discarded pieces stored in the maintenance room, he patiently repaired the damaged chain and adjusted the wheels until the bicycle rolled smoothly again. The boy's face lit up with gratitude, and Grace watched the entire scene with quiet admiration. "You always seem to know how to fix things," she said, as the child happily rode away. Ethan smiled modestly. "Sometimes, people just need someone willing to try." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment, as though she sensed there was far more to his story than he allowed anyone to see. Later that evening, Grace invited Ethan to her small home for dinner after learning he had nowhere else to go. The modest house needed repairs, and the furniture had clearly been used for many years, yet every corner reflected care and love. Her father welcomed Ethan with genuine warmth, thanking him for helping at the outreach center. During the meal, they laughed over simple stories, shared homemade soup, and spoke about hope instead of hardship. Ethan realized it had been years since he had enjoyed a dinner where nobody discussed money, investments, or status. As he prepared to leave, Grace quietly handed him a neatly folded scarf she had knitted herself during the winter months. "The evenings are getting colder," she said. "I thought this might help." Ethan accepted the gift with emotion he struggled to hide, because no one had ever given him something so meaningful that had cost so little. Walking back beneath the city lights, he understood that the blessing he had been searching for was never hidden inside luxury or success. It had appeared through kindness, sacrifice, and people whose hearts remained generous despite having so little. At that very moment, however, Samuel was waiting outside the shelter in an unmarked vehicle, carrying news that could no longer be delayed. The board had scheduled a nationally televised charity gala for the following evening, and Ethan's appearance was now absolutely unavoidable. Samuel waited until no one else was nearby before quietly stepping out of the vehicle. The moment Ethan saw his old friend, he understood that the peaceful chapter of his journey was coming to an end. Samuel handed him a sealed envelope containing the official invitation to the annual Carter Foundation Gala, an event broadcast across the country to celebrate major charitable partnerships. "The board cannot postpone it any longer," Samuel said softly. "Thousands of scholarships, community programs, and medical grants depend on your signature tomorrow night." Ethan lowered his eyes. He had started this journey searching for truth, but now the truth had found him in a way he never expected. "I cannot disappear forever," he admitted. "Too many innocent people would pay the price." Samuel nodded with quiet understanding. "Then perhaps it is time for everyone to meet the man you have become." The next morning, Ethan returned to the outreach center, as though nothing had changed. He helped unload fresh donations from a local bakery, repaired a broken storage shelf, and laughed with the children who had grown comfortable around him. Every ordinary moment suddenly felt precious, because he knew it might be his last day living as the quiet volunteer everyone simply called Ethan. Grace noticed that something seemed different. His smile remained warm, but there was a peaceful sadness in his eyes that had not been there before. During lunch, she invited him to sit beneath a large maple tree behind the center. "You have been unusually quiet today," she said gently. Ethan looked toward the children playing nearby before answering. "Have you ever met someone who changed your life without even realizing it?" Grace smiled thoughtfully. "I believe that happens more often than people notice." She reached into her bag and handed him a small notebook with a blue cover. "I keep encouraging quotes in here for difficult days," she explained. "I thought you might like to have it." Ethan slowly accepted the gift, deeply moved once again by her generosity. Inside the front cover, she had written a simple sentence in careful handwriting. "Your value is never measured by what you own. It is measured by how you treat people when nobody is watching." Ethan quietly closed the notebook, knowing those words would stay with him for the rest of his life. Late that afternoon, Grace received an unexpected telephone call from the organizers of the Carter Foundation Gala. One of the scheduled community representatives had become unavailable, and because the outreach center had recently been nominated for outstanding local service, they invited Grace to attend the event and accept a recognition award on behalf of her team. She was stunned. She had never attended a formal gala in her life and politely questioned whether they had contacted the right person. The organizer assured her there had been no mistake. After the call ended, the volunteers surrounded her with excitement, insisting she accept the invitation. Ethan smiled quietly, saying only that she deserved every honor that came her way. As Grace left the center that evening to borrow a simple dress from a friend, She had no idea that the elegant stage waiting for her the following night would also reveal the greatest secret she had ever encountered, and that the quiet man she believed she knew was already preparing to walk into that ballroom as someone the entire nation recognized. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as community leaders, business executives, journalists, and nonprofit organizations gathered for the annual Carter Foundation Gala. Grace felt slightly out of place in the simple navy blue dress she had borrowed from a friend, yet she carried herself with quiet confidence because she believed she was there to represent every volunteer who had served beside her. She accepted warm congratulations from other guests while wondering whether Ethan would be safe on his own that evening. The master of ceremonies welcomed everyone before announcing the arrival of the foundation's chairman. A large screen displayed photographs of schools, hospitals, scholarships, and neighborhood programs that had transformed thousands of lives across the country. Then the lights dimmed, and the announcer smiled. Please welcome the founder of the Carter Foundation, entrepreneur and philanthropist, Ethan Carter. Grace looked toward the stage with polite curiosity, expecting to see someone she had never met. Instead, she froze. A tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit walked confidently through the spotlight. His hair was neatly styled, his posture was strong, and there was no walking cane in his hand. Yet there was no mistaking his eyes or the gentle smile she had come to know. The quiet volunteer from the outreach center was standing before the entire nation as one of America's most respected business leaders. The room erupted into applause, while Grace struggled to understand what she was seeing. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stared in complete disbelief as recognition slowly crossed her face. Ethan began his speech calmly. He spoke about success, responsibility, and the importance of investing in people rather than appearances. Then he paused and looked directly toward Grace. "Several weeks ago," he said, "I left behind everything that identified me as a billionaire because I wanted to answer one simple question. If people believed I had nothing, would anyone still see value in me?" The ballroom became completely silent. Ethan continued by sharing how strangers had ignored him, judged him, or dismissed him. But one person had chosen compassion without expecting anything in return. He invited Grace to join him on stage. Still overwhelmed, she slowly walked forward as the audience watched with curiosity. Ethan smiled warmly and held up the small blue notebook she had given him. "This gift is worth more to me than anything money has ever purchased," he said. "It reminded me that character is revealed when nobody is watching." Many guests wiped away quiet tears as Ethan announced a major grant that would permanently fund the outreach center, expand its services, and provide medical assistance for families in need. He also revealed a new program dedicated to supporting community volunteers across the country, naming it the Grace Initiative, in honor of the woman whose kindness had restored his faith in humanity. Looking into her eyes, he spoke softly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "I prayed that God would show me whether true love still existed. I thought I was searching for someone to save me from loneliness. Instead, God sent me someone who reminded me how to become a better man." Grace smiled through grateful tears as the audience rose for a standing ovation. And in that unforgettable moment, Ethan finally understood that the greatest blessing he had ever received was never the fortune he had built, but the compassionate heart that had loved him long before anyone remembered his name.